is a conversation between texts. Before I get on my soapbox, did anybody actually read it? Okay, thank you. I will need to spoon feed you the information now. Margaret Atwood is an old Canadian lady, and she wrote Hag-Seed in 2016, and the rest of her stuff is not relevant. Hag-Seed is like the Audi version of the Tempest, right? You know who Shakespeare is, otherwise I would be a little bit concerned. This particular play was written in 1611, which was around about 5 years before he kicked the bucket, and it's the last play that he wrote on his own, because after that he got a bit lazy and got other people to do it for him. Some people saying that this was his goodbye to the stage. It's a bit debated, we don't really know. Does anybody know what a textual conversation is? It's not messaging.
Oh.
Erica, you read the texts, yeah? Did you form an opinion on the text?
Yeah, it was okay. Tempest was fun. The Hag-Seed was boring. I would have done it better.
Okay, so then you've had a conversation. So by even reading a text, you're having a conversation. But the more thought and depth that you put into it, the deeper it gets. Capiche? Like if I were to read it, sure, that's a conversation. But then if I was to think about it and analyse it and then publish a review, that would be a public conversation. You ever left a review on Goodreads? Okay, so that's a public conversation with the text. Do you think of any public conversations? Doesn't just have to be between books.
The diss tracks between Jake and Logan Paul.
Okay, not exactly what I was thinking of, but sure. Has anybody seen our Yankovic video? Like a parody?
Like the Key of Awesome?
Well, I'll come back to this. But basically, a parody is a type of public conversation, and so is a review. Parody is taking the ideas of a text, or in this instance, a Michael Jackson song, and then making fun of it in a way that is comedic. This very video is in fact a parody.
What?
A parody is just a way that a text can converse. Any movie, TV show, or book that has been reimagined from its original form is a conversation. Basically, Hag-Seed is an appropriation of the Tempest. So that is a form that she used, but can anybody think of why she made this text?
Does she have no better ideas?
Maybe Cody, maybe she did have no better ideas. But what happened before when I was giving you examples of things in pop culture and you weren't understanding? We did not understand because your examples were old and how you say in Australia? Shit! The Tempest needed to be appropriated so that new people can understand the same ideas. But modernising the themes and the characters in a way that is appealing to a new audience, she makes it easier to understand. You know, I'm Shakespeare and you guys are Atwood. I'm throwing information at you and it's just not sticking. So when I'm giving you the information without the contextual example, you're able to interpret that information and feed it back to me with an example that is more relevant to you, right? By giving you the exact same information but with a changed context, I've been able to convey the same idea. All Atwood did in her conversation is appropriate the stories of the Tempest to make them more relatable to you. The actual ideas haven't changed, they just click better now, yeah? So in the Tempest, the theme of imprisonment is inferred, but in Hag-Seed it's explicitly discussed. Shakespeare discusses the theme of imprisonment figuratively and metaphorically, but never quite explicitly mentioned as an inspiration or motivation for writing the text. Hag-Seed takes these inferred themes and makes them obvious and relevant to today's context. By placing Atwood's characters in a literal prison, Mr. Duke, who is Felix, is teaching the class about the 9 prisons of the play. This is meta-theatre because the later text is obviously commenting on the Genesis text. But does anyone want to have a guess at what one of the 9 prisons were?
Azkaban?
Not technically correct, but I will give it to you. Canonically, they are... Number 1, Sycorax. She is imprisoned on the island. She was sent there to die pretty much. She's imprisoned by everything around her. Number 2, Ariel. He spent 12 years stuck inside of a tree. And I don't know about you guys, but I really would not like that personally. Number 3, Prospero and Miranda are imprisoned on the boat. They don't really get much of a say. Number 4, Prospero and Miranda, once they get off the boat, are actually stuck on the island. They don't get to leave. Number 5, Caliban. He gets stuck in a rock for a cage. Number 6, Ferdinand. He is imprisoned by chains and by magic. Number 7, Alonso, Antonio and Sebastian are all also stuck on this island alongside Prospero and Miranda. Number 8. Stefano and Trinculo are stuck in a swamp. Number 9. Lucky last. Prospero. He is trapped within the play itself. Obviously, in her personal readings, Atwood was inspired by these themes of prisons, and then she took that and directly applied it with the Tempest. So, in the text, the characters often have conversations about the original text, which is, again, meta-theatre. Even this is meta-theatre.
What?
Felix even says that the Tempest is a play about prisons. There's not much that we can take from that except for the literal statement that the play is about prisons. Obviously, we can't take this as a fact because Shakespeare's not alive anymore and he hasn't been for at least 10 years, so we can't ask him personally. He was a nuanced bloke and he wrote nuanced plays, and that was even addressed within the text of Hag-Seed, because at one point it even says that's the thing about Shakespeare. He pops out and he surprises you. You might not think that a play is that deep, and then boom, there's a quote in there that makes everything make sense. This through the puppet of her protagonist is entrenching that conversation in the work. And not only does she do that through these quotes, but she also does this through the plot of the text. She's really having a conversation within the conversation. So the original conversation is the plot and the text itself, and within that there is a conversation that she is explicitly telling us about Shakespeare. Motivation in centering the play around prisons was quite clear. She was trying to bring humanity to incarcerated people. She did this again through Felix because it's the Felix show, and she said multiple times within the text that he refused to call them prisoners. So in doing that, she is giving humanity to these people, and she's binding them by who they are as people instead of the marginalised group that binds them together. Atwood also does this through Caliban. When discussing the text and when casting, Felix actually says that 15 of the players want to play Caliban. So in the original reading, we might see him as somewhat of a villain, but obviously these incarcerated people are seeing him as somewhat of a hero. And when Felix asked them why they wanted to play Caliban, they said, because we get him. They have similar stories and understandings. This, Atwood is giving a new personality to both the prisoners and Caliban. So by likening Caliban, who was originally seen as this kind of villain, to the prisoners, who, from what we're seeing, are very likeable people, we are seeing more of Caliban in his true self. Maybe he's not the villain. Maybe that's just the way that Prospero has manipulated us to think. She said it herself in a 2021 interview. She said that if anything, in this day and age, Caliban is the favourite, and everyone cheers for him.
Didn't he try and assault Miranda?
Next question. Look, we all have moral ambiguities, and it depends on how you read it. But you know what? The moral ambiguity is what kind of makes a Shakespeare. Think about it. Romeo and Juliet. Some people see that story as an inspiring story about young love and how family should stand in the way. But a lot of people, within today's context, actually see that and think, what idiots those teenagers were. So it just depends on who you are and how you read it. But that ambiguity is really what makes Shakespeare such a unique writer. Ambiguity in mind. Atwood did have to try and capture this within Hag-Seed. And there's an obvious ambiguity with the prisoners because they have made mistakes in their lives and they're obviously incarcerated for a reason. But from what we see, they are perfectly lovely people. And that ambiguity is a real life thing. A more interesting and less obvious ambiguity is Felix. Felix and Prospero. Prospero is somewhat of an immigrant between the two texts. Felix and Prospero are each other. Felix is him. They are, in many ways, the same person, just within different contexts. And depending on how Prospero is read, he can become either the great wise man or the vengeful, spiteful old bastard. Depends on how he's read. And we find out that the class actually thinks he's the latter. In discussion, 8 Hands says, Prospero thinks he's so awesome and superior he can put down what other people think. Prospero does stick up for his daughter. He does give her a superior education and he does value her as a person. But on the other hand, he held Caliban and Ariel in servitude and manipulated Miranda into marrying Ferdinand, believing there was love, even though that was the third bloke she ever met. He would be brought across by Felix. Obviously, he's somewhat vengeful towards his enemies. We can tell that. He's been plotting it since the start. But when he gets to that revenge, he nearly goes too far. And it takes a convicted felon to pull him in. And says, I know they're assholes and they're trying to snuff out players, but this is too sick even for me. It's beyond a bad trip. They're scared shitless. And then Felix replies with, it's part of the plan. Anyways, they had it coming. Egghead says, don't you feel sorry for them? This part of the story just serves to show us how fine the line is between retribution and cruelty. We are led to believe throughout the novel that Felix is a good man, but when this happens, that's all questioned. We see a good man that we trust begin to lose himself to violence. He loses some of his integrity, and then we question the whole novel and what he's told us. This doesn't make him a bad man, but then his previous actions don't make him a good man. Both Felix and Prospero are commentarial characters on human nature. Atwood has built upon Prospero through Felix because she is emphasizing how consistent these themes are within human nature across time, even centuries after the creation of the Genesis text. Both of these texts complement each other in conversation. Hag-Seed builds upon the characters and themes laid out in the Tempest, and by recycling, reproducing, deconstructing them, and putting them back together, has skillfully taken these things apart and reconstructed it to create an understandable and accessible text, sharing the same morals of Shakespeare. Hag-Seed is much more than just a recreation of an old play. It's a warm and welcoming conversation between the two texts.
Thanks for the bell.